The war was over. At least, that's what the official report said. The Zenvar Empire had fallen, their fleets shattered, their last stronghold turned to dust by humanity's relentless assault. For the first time in years, the galaxy was silent. No alarms, no distress signals, no desperate last stands. Just silence. And yet, as Captain Darius Kane stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, staring at the wreckage floating in space, he felt nothing close to victory. Something was wrong. Something deeper than the scars of war, deeper than the countless lives lost in battle. It was a feeling, a weight in his chest that told him this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The crew around him moved with a quiet exhaustion, their eyes heavy, their bodies slower than usual. They had fought for so long, given everything to this war. Now that it was over, they didn't know what to do with themselves. Kane understood that. He had been a soldier all his life, leading men into battle, making decisions that cost lives. But now, in this supposed moment of peace, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. It wasn't just the eerie quiet of a battlefield gone still. It was something unseen, something lurking just beyond the edge of his understanding. And then his communicator buzzed. "Captain," Commander Sarah Voss's voice was urgent, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You need to see this. Now." Kane turned, nodding to his second-in-command before striding toward the command center. The doors hissed open, revealing a room filled with flashing screens and tense officers. Voss stood in the center, her face pale, her jaw clenched. She pointed to a transmission playing on the main screen. Kane stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he read the words. "Classified report. Internal compromise suspected. Unauthorized data transfers detected. Possible traitorous activity." His pulse quickened. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. Voss shook her head. "It was hidden deep in our encrypted files. Someone didn't want us to find it." Kane exhaled sharply. "How recent?" "Last 6 months," she said grimly. "Battle plans, fleet positions, weapon caches. Someone was feeding intel to the Zenvar." His hands curled into fists. He had lost men, good men, because of bad intel. He had watched ships burn, soldiers scream, all because they had walked into traps they never should have. And now he knew why. Someone within humanity's own ranks had sold them out. Someone had betrayed their own kind, handed their people over to the enemy in exchange for what? Money? Power? Protection? It didn't matter. Whoever they were, whatever their reason, Kane knew one thing for certain. They would pay. A deep silence filled the room as the weight of the truth settled over them. The war might have been won, but the real enemy hadn't been defeated. They were still out there, hiding among their own, walking freely while millions of soldiers lay dead because of their actions. Kane's jaw tightened. "We're not done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not even close." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked afraid, others furious. Voss, however, nodded. "What's the plan?" Kane turned back to the screen, studying the encrypted messages, the patterns of betrayal hidden in plain sight. "We hunt them," he said. "We find them, and we end this, permanently." Voss exhaled, a small grim smile touching her lips. "Thought you'd say that." The next few hours were spent combing through every file, every suspicious transmission, every unexplained loss. Patterns began to emerge. Names, locations, events that didn't add up. Kane and his team followed the trail like bloodhounds, piecing together a puzzle that had been hiding beneath their noses for too long. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. This wasn't just one traitor. It was an entire network, woven into the very fabric of their military. High-ranking officers, intelligence officials, even fleet commanders, men and women who had fought alongside them, had been working against them all along. Rage burned in Kane's veins. He had trusted these people. He had bled for them. And they had repaid him with treachery. But anger alone wouldn't solve this. He needed proof. He needed names, locations, and most of all, he needed a target. Then, finally, they found one. Admiral Zale, a decorated war hero, a man respected by every soldier in the fleet. He had led countless battles, saved thousands of lives. But the evidence was undeniable. He had been the one leaking information. He had been the one ensuring humanity suffered just enough to keep the war going, just enough to weaken them, just enough to make them vulnerable. But why? Kane didn't care. All he cared about was what came next. Set course for Outpost K-17, he ordered. That's where Zale was last seen. Voss hesitated. Kane, if we go after him without evidence, we risk tearing everything apart. People trust him. They trusted him because they didn't know the truth, Kane said coldly. But they will. The ship's engines roared to life, the hum of power vibrating through the metal walls. Outside, the wreckage of the final battle drifted silently, a graveyard of ships and fallen warriors. The war was over, but for Kane, the real battle had just begun. He would find the betrayers, every last one of them. And when he did, there would be no mercy. The HSS Vengeance cut through the vast emptiness of space, its engines burning hot as it made its way toward Outpost K-17. On the bridge, Captain Darius Kane stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze locked on the star-filled void ahead. Every second that passed only fueled his anger. Admiral Zale, one of the most respected figures in humanity's military, was a traitor, a man who had stood in front of the fleet, given speeches about honor and sacrifice, and led them into battle. But beneath that shining reputation, he had been working against them, feeding intelligence to the enemy. The thought made Kane's blood boil. He had seen too many good soldiers die because of bad intel, had watched ships explode in the void, their crews never knowing they had been set up to fail. And now he knew why. Zale had been playing both sides. The war had been nothing but a game to him. But that game was over. Commander Sarah Voss stepped up beside Kane, her expression grim. "We're an hour away from Outpost K-17, she reported. "But there's something else you need to see." Kane turned, following her to the Central Command console. She tapped a few keys, and a series of encrypted transmissions appeared on the screen. "We ran another decryption on Zale's communications," she explained. "This wasn't just about leaking fleet positions. He was coordinating attacks, sabotage missions, assassinations." Kane's jaw tightened. Who was he working with? "That's the thing," Voss said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It wasn't just the Zenvar." She pulled up another file, showing a list of encrypted senders. The codes didn't match any known alien faction. They were human. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. He had help from within. Voss nodded. "A lot of help. We're looking at an entire network of traitors, some still active, some in hiding. And from the way they're communicating, I don't think they know the war is over." Kane exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the edge of the console. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about stopping something bigger than any of them had realized. If Zale and his people were still working in the shadows, then the war might have ended in the public eye. But in the darkness, it was still being fought. "Send a coded message to the fleet," Kane ordered. "Tell them to keep their eyes open. We don't know how deep this goes." Voss hesitated. "If we do that, Zale might catch on." Kane's expression hardened. "Then we move fast." The ship's AI chimed in. "Approaching Outpost K-17. Initiating docking procedures." Kane and Voss exchanged a look. No more waiting. It was time to confront the man who had betrayed them all. The outpost loomed ahead. A cold, dark station floating in the void. Once, it had been a major supply hub, but since the war's end, it had been abandoned by most of the fleet. Only a skeleton crew remained, and if Kane's suspicions were correct, Zale had chosen this place because he thought no one would come looking for him. The docking clamps locked into place, and the boarding ramp extended with a metallic hiss. Kane and his team suited up, weapons holstered but ready. "No mistakes," Kane warned. "We take him alive if we can. But if he resists..." His voice trailed off, but the message was clear. They stepped into the outpost, boots clanking against the steel floor. The station was eerily quiet, the overhead lights flickering. The place smelled of burnt circuits and stale air. Something wasn't right. Voss motioned toward a corridor. "Security logs say he's in the command center." Kane nodded, signaling his team to move. They advanced cautiously, checking every corner. The deeper they went, the worse the feeling in Kane's gut became. This wasn't just an abandoned outpost. It was a trap. They reached the command center doors. Kane gave a silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. The doors slid open and chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the air as hidden enemies sprang from the shadows. It wasn't just Zale inside. He had men, loyalists, mercenaries, traitors, waiting for them. Kane dove behind cover as bullets and plasma blasts scorched the walls. "Ambush," he roared. Voss returned fire, taking down one of the attackers. They were expecting us. Kane gritted his teeth. "We fight our way through." He had come for Zale, but now it was clear. This was bigger than just one man. The war wasn't over. It had only changed shape. And if humanity was going to survive what was coming, they had to root out the traitors, one by one. And it started here. Now, the battle inside Outpost K-17 raged on, gunfire echoing through the cold metal corridors. Kane pressed himself against the wall as plasma bolts scorched past him, leaving glowing burns on the steel. His team moved like a well-oiled machine, taking cover, returning fire, and advancing inch by inch. The traitors had set the trap well, but they hadn't counted on one thing: Kane's relentless determination. He wasn't just here for a mission. He was here for vengeance. Commander Sarah Voss took down an enemy with a precise shot, then ducked back behind a console. "They've got reinforcements," she called over the comms. "At least a dozen more on the other side of the control room. We need to push forward before they box us in." Kane checked his ammo, then took a deep breath. "On my mark," he ordered. "We take the left flank first. Move." His team surged forward, unloading suppressive fire as they advanced. The enemy scrambled, trying to adjust. But Kane's soldiers were faster, sharper. They had fought an entire war against alien forces. This was nothing compared to that. Within seconds, they had cleared the left side, forcing the remaining traitors to retreat deeper into the outpost. Kane stepped over the body of a fallen enemy and motioned for his team to fan out. He knew Zale was here somewhere, hiding like the coward he was. The security feed had shown him inside the command center before the attack. He had to be close. Voss pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device. "I'm picking up movement in the lower levels. There's an emergency tunnel leading out of the station." Kane clenched his fists. "He's running." He turned to his team. "We cut him off. No one lets him escape." They moved quickly, navigating the winding corridors of the station. The deeper they went, the darker it became, with emergency lighting flickering overhead. The smell of burnt metal and ozone filled the air, the station still carrying the scars of old battles. As they neared the tunnel entrance, a sudden explosion shook the outpost. Kane barely had time to react before a section of the ceiling collapsed behind them, cutting off their retreat. Dust and debris filled the air, and the distant sound of hissing vents signaled a breach somewhere in the station. "He's trying to bury us alive," Voss muttered. Kane wiped dust from his visor. "Not gonna happen. Move." They sprinted through the tunnel, the walls narrowing as they descended. It was an old maintenance shaft, barely large enough to fit two people side by side. The metal creaked under their boots. Then Kane saw him. At the far end of the tunnel, a shadowy figure was rushing toward an escape pod. Admiral Zale. Kane raised his weapon. "Zale, stop right there." Zale froze for just a second before turning, His hands raised slightly. He looked different than Kane remembered. Thinner, more desperate. His once pristine uniform was stained, and his eyes darted between Kane and the nearby escape controls. "I should have known you'd come, Kane," Zale said, his voice calm despite the situation. "You never could let things go." Kane stepped closer, weapons still trained. "You betrayed us. You fed our people to the enemy." Zale exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't understand. I did what had to be done. Humanity's survival." Kane cut him off. "Spare me. Millions died because of you, and now you're going to answer for it." Zale's fingers twitched toward the console. Kane caught the movement instantly. "Don't." But Zale smirked. "You always were too predictable." Before Kane could react, Zale slammed his hand on the console. Alarms blared. The escape pod launched into the void, but it wasn't just a pod, it was a detonator. Kane's instincts kicked in. Get down. A massive explosion tore through the tunnel, sending Kane and his team flying backward. The force of the blast ripped through the outpost, setting off secondary detonations. Kane hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. The sound of ringing filled his ears. As the smoke cleared, Kane groaned, pushing himself up. "Status." Voss coughed, shaking dust from her armor. "We're alive." "Barely." Kane turned to where the escape pod had been. Zale was gone. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. Kane clenched his fists. The traitor had slipped away, but not for long. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The remains of Outpost K-17 drifted through space, fires still burning in the wrecked sections of the station. Kane stood at the edge of the damaged tunnel, staring at the black void where Zale's escape pod had disappeared. His breathing was steady, but his mind was racing. The traitor had slipped through his fingers, again. Commander Voss wiped blood from her forehead, her expression grim. "We should have seen it coming," she muttered. Zale had every contingency planned. Kane's fists tightened. "Not every contingency," he growled. "He's running. That means he's vulnerable." Voss exhaled. "We lost our best shot at capturing him. If he reaches one of his allies, he'll disappear." Kane turned to his team, his voice sharp. "We're not letting that happen. Get me everything on Zale's escape route. He had a ship waiting somewhere." Lieutenant Jackson, the team's tactical officer, was already working at a nearby console, tracking his pod now. "He's heading for the Tarsus sector." He frowned. "But there's something odd. His trajectory isn't leading to a fleet or an outpost. He's heading for a dead zone." Kane narrowed his eyes. "A dead zone." Jackson nodded. "A system with no known habitable planets, no recorded activity for years." But he tapped a few more keys. "There's a faint energy signature. It's being masked, but something's there." Kane's gut told him exactly what it was. A hidden base. Voss folded her arms. "So Zale has a safe house. Figures. If he gets there, he'll regroup. We'll lose our chance." Kane looked at his crew. "Then we don't let him get there." The Vengeance surged through space at full speed, engines burning hot as it raced toward the Tarsus sector. The crew worked in tense silence, every second counting. Kane stood on the bridge, his mind replaying every detail of Zale's betrayal. The war had ended, but the wounds it left were deep. Millions had died because of traitors like Zale. And now, even after everything, he was still out there, still scheming, still putting humanity at risk. Jackson's voice broke through Kane's thoughts. "We're approaching the dead zone. Scanners picking up minimal activity." Kane stepped forward. "Minimal isn't nothing. Get us closer." The ship slowed as they entered the sector. At first, it seemed empty, just another lifeless stretch of space. But then, the scanners picked up something. A distortion. A cloaking field. Kane smirked. "There you are." Voss glanced at the readings. "It's big. A full-scale hidden facility." Kane nodded. And if Zale is heading there, we won't be the only ones arriving. The ship's alarms blared. Multiple enemy signatures appeared on the screen. Zale's allies. Jackson's face paled. Incoming ships, a lot of them. Kane grinned, his grip tightening on the rail. Good. Let's show them why humanity survived this war. As the enemy fleet closed in, the Vengeance charged into battle. The hunt for Zale was far from over. It was just getting started. The battlefield in space was chaos. The enemy fleet, a mix of rogue human warships and alien mercenary vessels, moved into formation, blocking any approach to the hidden base. Their weapons powered up, shields shimmering in the void. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Kane watched the tactical display, his jaw tight. They were outnumbered. Badly. 20 enemy ships, Jackson reported, his fingers dancing across the console. Mix of corvettes, frigates, and at least 2 cruisers. Voss swore under her breath. That's a lot of firepower. Kane didn't blink. Doesn't matter. We're not running. The Vengeance was a powerful ship, but not invincible. If they charged in without a plan, they'd be torn apart. And if they hesitated, Zale would slip away into the base, disappearing for good. Kane turned to his crew. We need to punch through fast. If we get bogged down in a drawn-out fight, we lose our chance. Voss studied the display. The enemy formation is focused on defense. They expect us to engage head-on. Kane smirked. Then we don't. His mind worked quickly, piecing together a strategy. Jackson, divert all power to forward shields and engines. We're going to ram their line at full speed. Target the weak points in their formation and break straight through. Jackson's eyes widened. That's risky as hell. Kane's expression was ice. So was winning the war. Voss grinned. I like it. They won't expect us to charge right through them. Then let's move. The Vengeance's engines roared to life, and the ship accelerated at an alarming speed. The enemy fleet reacted immediately, shifting position to counter the sudden assault. Plasma bolts and railgun rams streaked through space, hammering against the forward shields. The ship shook violently, but Kane stood firm, gripping the rail. Shields at 60%. Jackson shouted. We won't hold forever. Almost there, Kane growled. The enemy ships scrambled to adjust, their tight formation breaking apart. That was the opening Kane had been waiting for. Now, fire all weapons. The Vengeance unleashed everything. Railguns, torpedoes, ion cannons, ripping through the enemy ships at close range. The smaller vessels exploded instantly, while the larger ones reeled from the sudden assault. The chaos in their ranks created a gap just large enough for the Vengeance to slip through. We're past them, Voss called out, heading straight for the base. The hidden station loomed ahead, its massive structure barely visible against the black void of space. It was old, built deep within an asteroid field, shielded by a powerful cloaking system. Now, its defenses were coming to life. Point defenses are locking onto us, Jackson warned. If they hit us with those rail batteries, we're done. Kane's mind raced. If they stopped now, they'd be sitting ducks. But if they pushed forward, they'd have seconds to breach the station before being torn apart. Prepare for a combat landing, Kane ordered. We take the fight inside. Voss's eyes widened. You mean board the station? You got a better idea. Kane snapped. Voss grinned. Nope. Just wanted to hear you say it. The Vengeance dove straight toward the station, dodging incoming fire. The hull groaned under the pressure as the ship pushed its engines to the limit. Then, with a thunderous impact, the Vengeance crashed into one of the station's docking bays. The metal walls crumpled, alarms blaring as fire and debris filled the air. The ship's hull was damaged, but they had made it. Kane unbuckled himself and grabbed his weapon. Move out. Zale is in there somewhere, and we're not leaving without him. The boarding ramp dropped, and Kane's team charged into the station. The air was thick with smoke, the emergency lights flickering. Armed guards were already scrambling, firing as they rushed to defend the base. Kane and his soldiers fought their way forward, clearing rooms with precise, ruthless efficiency. Every corner of the station was a battlefield. The enemy had the numbers, but Kane's team had something more: determination. They pushed deeper, following Zale's trail. He was running again, retreating toward the command center. But this time, there was nowhere left to run. Kane pressed forward, his pulse steady. This was it. The endgame. One way or another, the traitor would face justice. The air inside the station was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. Sirens blared, flickering red emergency lights casting eerie shadows against the walls. Kane led his team forward, moving with deadly precision. Their boots thudded against the steel floor as they pushed deeper into the facility, weapons raised and ready. "Jackson, give me a layout," Kane ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Jackson worked his handheld scanner, his eyes narrowing. "Zale's heading for the command center. There's a direct route through these corridors, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Kane demanded. Jackson exhaled sharply. "There's an automated defense grid between us and him. Sentry turrets, blast doors, probably some nasty surprises." Kane's jaw tightened. "Of course there is. He's had this place prepared for a long time." Voss glanced around the corridor. "Then we don't take the direct route. There has to be another way." Jackson swiped across the map. "There's an access tunnel 2 levels down. It's meant for maintenance crews, but it connects to the command center's lower levels. If we move fast, we can cut Zale off before he escapes." Kane nodded. "Then we move now. Everyone, stay sharp." They advanced quickly, sweeping through abandoned corridors and dimly lit halls. The deeper they went, the more they saw evidence of Zale's treachery: stolen human tech, encrypted data terminals filled with classified military reports, and even weapons meant for the enemy. Voss kicked over a crate of stolen supplies. "He didn't just betray us. He's been feeding them everything." Kane clenched his fists. "That's why we're ending this today." They reached the maintenance access hatch. Kane wrenched it open, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. One by one, they climbed down. The air grew colder, the hum of distant machinery the only sound. Then, movement. Kane raised a fist, signaling a stop. He peered ahead, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Figures moved in the shadows. Guards, waiting in ambush. "They know we're coming," Voss muttered. Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. Let's not disappoint them." He gave the signal, and his team sprang into action. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the tight space. The enemy fought hard, but Kane's team fought harder. They moved with ruthless efficiency, clearing the tunnel section by section. The last guard fell, and silence returned. Jackson wiped sweat from his forehead. "They were stalling us." Kane's gut twisted, which means Zale's almost at his exit. They hurried forward, emerging from the tunnel into a vast control room. Monitors lined the walls, displaying ship movements, encrypted messages, evidence of Zale's secret war. And standing at the far end, fingers dancing across a control panel, was the traitor himself. Zale turned, his expression calm. "Commander Kane, I was hoping we'd get to speak before the end." Kane leveled his weapon. "No more games, Zale. It's over." Zale smirked. "Is it?" A loud rumble shook the station. Jackson checked his scanner, his face draining of color. "He's activated the self-destruct." Zale spread his hands. "If I can't have this base, no one can." Kane's pulse pounded. The station was massive. If it detonated, it would take them all with it. Zale took a step back. "You can shoot me now, Kane, or you can try to stop the explosion. Your call." Kane's grip on his rifle tightened. He wanted to end Zale right then and there, but his team was watching, waiting for his call. He made his choice. "Jackson, Voss, shut it down. I'll deal with Zale." Voss hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Go," Kane barked. Jackson and Voss sprinted to the control panels, frantically working to override the countdown. Kane stepped toward Zale. The traitor tilted his head, as if amused. "You always were predictable, Kane." Kane didn't reply. He just raised his weapon. Zale moved fast, faster than expected. He lunged, drawing a concealed blade, slashing toward Kane's throat. Kane barely dodged, the blade slicing the air inches from his face. They grappled, fists colliding with brutal force. Zale was strong, but Kane was stronger. He drove a knee into Zale's gut, sending him staggering back. But Zale wasn't done. He reached for his belt, pulling a small detonator. "If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Kane fired. The shot struck Zale's hand, the detonator clattering to the floor. Zale clutched his bleeding hand, his expression twisted with rage. "You." Kane didn't let him finish. He delivered a final, crushing blow to Zale's face, knocking him out cold. "How's that override coming?" Kane called out. Jackson cursed. "We've got seconds." Kane grabbed the detonator, slamming it against the control panel. Sparks flew, circuits overloaded, then silence. The countdown froze. Voss let out a breath. "We did it." Kane looked down at Zale's unconscious body. The traitor was finally in his hands. But Kane wasn't satisfied. Not yet. "Secure him," Kane ordered. "We're not done here." The war was over. The hunt was ending. But justice was just beginning. The silence after the chaos felt unnatural. The control room still smelled of burning wires, and the flickering emergency lights cast long, shifting shadows across the floor. Kane stood over Zale's unconscious body, breathing heavily. His knuckles were raw, and his pulse pounded in his ears. But he didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Jackson wiped sweat from his forehead, his hand still hovering over the control panel. "That was too damn close," he muttered. Voss leaned against the console, catching his breath. "We stopped the self-destruct, locked down the base. But what now, Kane?" Kane exhaled sharply, his mind already moving ahead. "Now we do what we came here for. We find out how deep this betrayal goes." Jackson frowned. "You think Zale was just one part of this?" Kane glanced down at the unconscious traitor. "No one builds an operation like this alone." He had help, maybe inside our own ranks, maybe outside. "We need to know everything." He turned to Voss. "Secure Zale. Make sure he doesn't pull any more tricks when he wakes up." Voss gave a sharp nod, pulling out reinforced cuffs. He bound Zale's wrists and ankles, ensuring there was no chance of escape. Jackson tapped at the console, pulling up encrypted files. "There's a lot here, Kane. Military reports, fleet movements, even classified intel on our defense systems." His voice darkened. He was planning something much bigger than just sabotaging the war effort. Kane leaned over his shoulder. "Can you decrypt it?" "Given time, yeah," Jackson said. "But there's something else. A transmission log." Kane's stomach tightened. "From who?" Jackson worked the controls, then cursed. "It's encrypted, but the coordinates, these aren't enemy signals." Voss raised an eyebrow. Then who the hell was Zale talking to? Jackson brought up a holographic map, highlighting the transmission origin. Kane's blood ran cold. This is from inside Terran space," Jackson said slowly. "Someone from our own side has been feeding him information." Kane clenched his fists. It was worse than he thought. Zale wasn't the mastermind, just a pawn in something far more dangerous. Voss looked at Kane. "If we've got a leak in high command, this could go all the way to the top." Kane nodded grimly. "Then we take this information straight to Admiral Greaves. No one else. Until we know who we can trust, we move in the shadows." Jackson hesitated. "That might not be an option. The moment we pull this data, whoever's behind this will know. They'll try to erase any evidence." Kane thought fast. "Then we don't pull the data. We take the whole damn system." Voss whistled. You're saying we haul this entire station back? Kane smirked. That's exactly what I'm saying. Jackson laughed, shaking his head. You're insane. I like it. Kane turned serious. Get the engines online. Prep the station for emergency transit. We're not just leaving here with answers. We're bringing the whole truth with us. Voss and Jackson moved quickly, activating emergency power and rerouting controls to manual override. Kane paced, watching Zale's unconscious form. Zale had thought he could play both sides, profit from betrayal. But he hadn't counted on Kane hunting him down. He hadn't counted on humanity's refusal to stay broken. The war was over. The hunt for the traitors had led them here. But the real fight was just beginning. The engines roared to life, shaking the station as emergency power surged through its systems. Kane gripped the console, feeling the vibration beneath his boots. The old station groaned in protest, never designed for rapid relocation. But they didn't have a choice. If they stayed, the real traitors, the ones hiding within their own ranks, would come to silence them. Jackson worked furiously at the controls, his fingers flying across the panel. Engines are at 30% and climbing, he called out. But we've got a problem. Kane didn't like the sound of that. What now? Jackson grimaced. Someone sent out a distress signal before we locked down the system. We've got incoming ships. Voss swore. How many? Jackson pulled up the display, and the color drained from his face. 4. No, 6 warships. Fast movers. ETA. 7 minutes. Kane clenched his fists. Damn it. They want to wipe this place off the map before we can get away. Voss checked his rifle. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. Kane nodded. Jackson, how fast can you get us moving? Jackson's hands didn't stop moving. If I push it. 5 minutes. Make it 3, Kane ordered. He turned to Voss. We need to buy time. We can't let them get close enough to fire. Voss grinned. Got just the thing. He sprinted down the corridor, heading toward the station's armory. Kane knew what he was thinking. Station defenses were weak, but sabotage could slow the enemy. The station shuddered again. Kane looked back at Zale, still unconscious and bound. A traitor. A pawn. But not the real mastermind. Kane's comm crackled. They're hailing us, Jackson said. Put it through. A cold, distorted voice filled the room. This is Captain Drell of the 5th Fleet. You are harboring a fugitive and stolen military data. Stand down immediately. Kane scoffed. Or what? A pause. Then, or you die. Kane grinned. Good luck with that. He cut the channel. Jackson raised an eyebrow. That might have pissed them off. Good, Kane said. Let them come. We'll give them a hell of a welcome. Voss returned, hauling a crate of explosives. Set the station to blow once we leave. Kane nodded. We take what we need and leave them nothing. Jackson's console beeped. Engines at full power. We can jump in 60 seconds. Outside, the enemy ships moved closer. The lead vessel charged its cannons. Kane grabbed Zale by the collar, hauling him up. The traitor groaned, eyes fluttering open. Kane smirked. Rise and shine. You're coming with us. The station's engines roared, and the entire structure trembled. Jackson hit the controls. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. The world twisted, and in a blink, the station vanished into the void. The enemy fleet fired a second too late. They were gone. For now. But Kane knew this wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. The betrayers were still out there, hiding in the highest ranks of the fleet. And now, humanity was coming for them.